Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Ambreen Shahriar, Senior Lecturer Education at London Metropolitan University, UK. Thank you all for inviting me to International Conference on Social Psychology and Humanity Studies 2024. It's a pleasure being here. Today, I'll be talking about, let me share my screen first. Okay. Today I'll be talking about decolonizing BA, decolonizing the education curriculum in teaching on the BA and MA education. This is a very important topic and has been under discussion for a very long time, and I would therefore like to discuss it in some detail here in this conference. I've got a very limited time and I'll try to capture as much of it as possible. Well, the contents of today's discussion are decolonizing education degrees, decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing pedagogies, and responding to colonization. So how should our own response be like? Okay. Moving on and starting with the first one, decolonizing education degrees. Now, it's a very important factor to understand what decolonization actually means and how it affects us as educators. We as academics, researchers, educators, need to rethink, reframe, and reconstruct the current curriculum to make it better and more inclusive. We need to expand our notion of knowledge so it does not always elevate one voice, one experience, one way of being in the world. We need to recognize that a colonial curriculum is unrepresentative, inaccessible, and privileged in nature. And I'm going to explain them one by one. It's unrepresentative because it selectively constructs teaching, which excludes certain crucial narratives. It's just telling one side of the story. It's just telling all the stories of the world from one perspective. It's inaccessible because it prevents many of its recipients from identifying with the narrative constructed. For example, if it's the white middle class educated men telling the story of China, it's a story that a Chinese student would not be able to relate to, would not be able to identify to. And it's privileged because it ensures the continued participation, comfort, and flourish of a selected group of people in both academic and in general social context. And having understood this, moving on to axiology, epistemology, and ontology, all three of them come together to make colonial violence known. Simple. Our thought pattern is influenced, our relationship with knowledge as well. My values, my knowledge, and generally my being. When our entire understanding is based on the idea that colonization is a sacred trust where colonizers are on a civilizing mission, you can imagine this is the very root of racial ideology. And moving forward, I mean, colonization might have ended, but colonialism hasn't. There's a permanence of colonialism. It's there in our education, in our society, in our thinking, in everything. It's part of our being. So there has to be a social healing and social reconstruction. We need to rebuild human interaction, which allows a society to function properly. It involves the healing of psychological and social wounds of colonialism on individuals and societies. Post-colonial societies have experienced trauma, violence, displacement, both social and psychological. Therefore, the process of restoring the psychological and social well-being of individuals and communities upon whom colonial violence is inflicted must start. There must be a social construction, the process of rebuilding the social fabric, and institutions to build and to enable a society to think democratically. After all, democracy was the promise given by colonizers, and the promise must be kept. Racism is deeply institutionalized. We all have been experiencing racism every moment, everywhere. And at times we don't realize it either. Cognitive reframing is needed. Rethinking, reframing the context through which we learn. Change the way we view situations, experiences, events, ideas, emotions. Our thoughts, influences, feelings, behaviors, and that by challenging and changing our thoughts, we can change our values, our relationships with knowledge, and our being. We need liberated and free education, a decolonized education. Moving on, decolonizing the curriculum. We in the School of Education make teachers. We produce teachers, okay? There's a production. We are a company or a factory. We have students coming here who want to teach, who want to change their students' lives. They realize that, but if they realize that they are in fact being violent to their students, it would shake their entire existence. It's therefore very important for us to begin the change here. Start decolonizing our curriculum for BA and MA in education. Okay. And we need to understand that decolonizing the curriculum is not an event. It's an approach. It is a process which goes on. It has to start and it will continue for a very long time. It will not just end just like that. Okay. We need to understand that at one point, the term white people ceased to exist, and that people simply meant white people, as anyone other than white people are not. World was seen through the eye of educated white men. We need to stop prioritizing the discoveries of white men. We need to stop seeing world from this one Western perspective. We need to stop this us and them of the stories. We need to transform education. We need to centralize education. Knowledge is not solely produced in West. Knowledge has been produced for ages in East. I would rather say it's new to West. So they need to try to make use of the knowledge produced for centuries in East, but also to tell the discoveries and inventions and stories of people of East. Okay? Not just, world seen from the perspective of West, but, knowledge has to be centralized and everybody giving their input into it. We need to transform education. We need to take 3 steps to decolonize. We need to acknowledge that the curriculum is colonized, and acknowledging the influence of colonization on society, And then we need to act. Act to understand how to make our curriculum representative. We need to understand, for example, what are classics and who decides them to be classics. Why Shakespeare is a classic and Stormzy. I mean, all different people have their different tastes and they go according to that. Their classics vary, including a poem by Maya Angelou is not enough. It's not the action that's needed. We need to avoid othering. We don't have to just tick box that we have, included everybody. No, 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 no. We have to adapt. We have to have all different perspectives filling into this, education, this bowl of education. And then we need to instead of us deciding whose narrative, the educators or the curriculum developers deciding whose perspective we remember and whose we do not even mention, we rather tell our students all different perspectives and let them decide whose they want to remember and whose they allow themselves to forget. And it's not the responsibility of the other to help decolonize. Decolonization has to happen from all different directions, from top to bottom. We need to prioritize indigenous perspective. We need to start telling the truth. And both sides of the story, all sides of the story. I mean, I disagree even if there's two sides of a story. There are so many individual sides of the story. They all need to be told. But then you also need to ask if you have the right to tell that story, because as we've been seeing for centuries, or at least decades, the stories of East, the stories of, let's say, India and China and Brazil are told by white men. They need to ask if they have the right to tell the story. Because when they are telling the story, they are telling their perspective of the story. We need to bring the indigenous perspective of the story and let the indigenous people tell their own stories. Moving on, decolonizing pedagogies. Decolonizing pedagogies requires that we are continually concerned with how theories of knowledge undergird our pedagogical practices and how those theories of knowledge are informed by colonization. You see the root cause behind all this. Axiology, epistemology, and ontology need to be rethought out, because all of them are based on a colonized mindset. There has been colonialism of minds for a century or so. Critical thinking, expectations from students of color, things need to change. I mean, we expect from students of color that they would achieve low. And if that's what they achieve, nobody tries to help them. That's what was expected. They are not supposed to go higher. Do we think why are students of color underachieving? Is it because they are less intelligent? Or because they are expected to achieve less? Or because they are not able to relate to the curriculum or the pedagogies or the society in general, if you ask me? That's where I always say voices need highlighting. Stories need to be told. We have done a lot of harm. And there needs to be a practice developed to undo the harm. We need to start with diversifying curriculum. And when we're talking about diversifying curriculum, yes, expanding it to be inclusive, intersectional, including academics and readings from underrepresented backgrounds, having diverse curriculum to, highlight the often ignored contributions of marginalized people in academia, being critical of historically dominant narratives. I mean, that should be the priority of an institution, and at least all higher education institutions, diversifying the curriculum, okay, and diversifying the pedagogies, more specifically as well. But then that's not enough. That's not enough. We need to move on to transforming, because it's the transformation that would actually bring in decolonization. There have been and there are many challenges that humanity is facing today, which cannot be solved with Eurocentric practices and models of how the society works. We need new ways of thinking and approaching knowledge, creation, curation, conveyance. And we need to embrace the complexity and challenge of dealing with the contradictions inherent in merging different systems of knowledge. We need to get help from other cultures and civilizations. And when I'm saying other, yes, that's what the education has been doing. It's been othering all this time. We need to centralize it. Knowledge has not solely been produced in West. Knowledge has been produced in East for centuries. And we need to understand that knowledge or inventions or philosophy that has been produced in East for so long needs to be used in order to bring decolonization. So that when somebody gets education, they have an exposure to all the valuable knowledge, and then they have the right to choose from this knowledge, or maybe build on all that knowledge and grow, which is wonderful, isn't it? You cannot and you should not keep the knowledge bound to one specific perspective. We think that colonization has ended. And yes, it has. Colonization has ended, but colonialism has not. So we need to work on ending the colonialism of minds. Moving on, how would I decolonize through teaching? We need to ask questions. We need to ask very important questions. What are the dominant narratives and perspectives saying? And what do they ignore and omit? How do you encourage and support learners to think critically about evidence, sources of knowledge, language, representation, power relations? What steps can you take to include knowledge, ideas, experiences, and perspectives of disadvantaged and marginalized people and communities? And also, we need to stop making them disadvantaged, marginalized communities and groups. We need to make them one of the many groups. We all are one of the many groups, providing this source of knowledge that's right in the middle of us. which it has not been. It's been a source of knowledge kept in a corner from where the entire world is viewed, and which presented the worldview, this Western perspective. Now we need to bring this source of knowledge in the middle, and then everybody adds to that source, and it'll grow. And then the future would build on that source. We need to think about what further steps can we take to support learners to think critically about evidence, representation, language and linguistic diversity, equality and power relations, and to take action to challenge discrimination and injustice. Very important questions, very little time to discuss these. But yes, this is a debate that has started for some time and will continue until a goal is accomplished. So yes, this is just the beginning. I just thought to give you a little bit of how you would respond personally to all this. And I thought it's very important that, yes, as teachers, academics, researchers, we think about our own, how can we make a change personally? Do nothing and stay safe. That's the best and initial thing, okay? But we're not there for that. We're not there for doing nothing. We're there to make a difference, isn't it? We need to understand our power, our position. Try to develop on it and try to change where we can bring a difference. But then at times you can inform the others as well who are violent, that they are violent. You must do that. You must stop people at times. But then in response, you should expect that the response can be violent as well. So, I wouldn't say just be violent to people. Just make your way slowly. Build in relationships with those committing violence. Make them understand what you've learned, what they're doing is wrong, why it's wrong. Talk to people, build personal relations. A little change little individual, personal level change would bring bigger social changes. Process and respond accordingly. That's very important. And then understand the situation, think about what you've learned, and always progress from your understandings. Our thoughts are very important to our building. Our experiences are very important to our progress and growth. So bring the experience home, decide you would improve on your being, and that's it. Thank you so much, guys. I'm stopping sharing this. It was a pleasure being part of this conference. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care and stay in contact.